So a while back you may remember my gravity build for Lepic, offering some crazy mobbing potential while also giving essentially god mode to you and your teammates for around about 40% of its uptime from enemies affected by that traction grenade. Now ever since that video released I've been toying about with it in the background, thinking of better ways to improve it, as I really thought I was onto something special here, but with thanks to some recent weapon buffs, a little help from the current seasonal mechanic, and even one very helpful commenter called Thomas Waller 932 pointing me in the right direction, I can finally unveil the awaited sequel to Gravity. So here's Gravity 2.0. Now in this video we'll be looking at why I think Lepic's gravity build is so strong in this current season, taking on content from invasions to special ops, all the pieces you'll need to get it to work within your games, and lastly the general playstyle to get the most out of him. Of course, if you do learn something useful with this video and want to see more breakdowns and guides for Descendants, make sure to drop that like and subscribe so you can find your way back for more uploads. But with that out of the way though, let's get started. Alright then, so as we always do, let's head into our Descendant module screen so you can have a look as to what the build currently looks like. Now you will notice that this isn't fully catalyzed. The reason for that is because one, this is very heavily, it's so intensive when it comes to the amount of catalysts you need to be able to go into this to swap over from something like a Colossus type build. So you can see that we do have a lot of symbols that are going to be changing. Now what I wanted to do was try and minimize that where I possibly could, because I've already got so many into Lepic, I don't need to be able to pop even more into him. So we do have a couple of things that do manage to like transfer over and everything like that, so it's not like we have to redo the whole thing or anything, but yeah, it is going to take a couple more catalysts to be able to go from one build over to another. Yeah, so essentially this is how it currently looks. We do not need to be able to max out all these mods, and I will explain every single one of those choices as we go through. Now, because of this build, we are going to be maximizing on cooldown as well as duration, and the reason why is to be able to go through our skill 3. This is going to be our traction grenade, and the idea with this is to get that cooldown down from that 25 seconds, so we've managed to get it down to 4.7 seconds, which I believe is an improvement on what we had for the previous gravity build. I think that's possibly going to be down to the reactor, but 4.7 seconds with a duration of 3.8. Now, even though it looks like there is a solid second where this isn't going to be doing anything, this actually does work out to be around about 100% uptime because of how this grenade behaves and how it kind of treats the enemies that are being pulled in. So essentially the grenade will last for so long, but the enemies are lifted up into the air, and then once they're dropped down, they have like a momentary kind of like, you know, kind of period where they're not able to do anything because they're currently landing back on the ground. So because of that, that kind of covers everything that we kind of need to do with this, which means that by the time we've then chucked another one out, they essentially cannot move whatsoever. So this pretty much kind of has 100% uptime in terms of how this grenade behaves. So even with that 0.9 second difference, you're going to notice it in your games anyway, so you'll see it from some of the clips that have been in the background. So how we're achieving this is by maxing out into cooldown first. The first way to be able to do things like this is we're going to go grab things like MP conversion. We're also going to be grabbing into nimble fingers. That's going to be the main bulk of it. But on top of that, we do add in our focus on fire, and we add in focus on tech. Now, the reason why we've gone it for this way round is because our modifiers are already quite nice when it comes to Lepic. So we're not really going to benefit too much when it comes to our ultimate. We're not really going to benefit too much from modifiers when we go into our grenade throw. But if we go into focus on fire and we do actually maximize this out, not only is this going to give us more skill power to be able to chuck into all those modifiers, meaning that we're going to get even more damage, it also gives us a nice little option to be able to sponge a little bit of some enemies, to be able to kind of like soften them up, ready for basically everything else that's going to be done with the rest of this build. So it's a great way of being able to chunk down some of their health bars. So we do have kind of like maxed out in the way that you can kind of see here. We also obviously want to go into range because we do want to increase the reach that the traction grenade pretty much has. So we do have things like skill expansion, which is going to be great for that. We also have maximize range on top of that because I believe this is a 300% up to 300% max expandable range, and currently we're able to add on 186.7%, so we are missing around about 13% when it comes to range, which is why we're not increasing that any further. So essentially we're just missing out on 1.2 meters of radius. That's about it. So this is pretty much as close as we can possibly get, really, to that like maximum range. This is more than enough for what we needed to be able to do, and you'll see it in some of the gameplay as to like how far this pretty much can kind of reach out and touch enemies. So this is absolutely fantastic. So we've also got that. On top of that, we also have mentioned duration, and the way we're able to do that is through things like skill extension, which is going to be a huge way to do that. We also have maximized duration, which is going to give us the biggest increase for when it comes to a purple mod for the amount of duration. And lastly, we have also gone into Battle of Stamina. This is a great way of being able to give us some nice skill duration, on top of being able to give us a little bit more HP. Now, we don't necessarily need the HP in this build, which is why you can see it's not maximized out, but if you do feel like, if you do have a catalyst in here, if you do have a C module basically to be able to like cut this in half, feel free to be able to max it out if you need to, but even at just 30% extra health, this is more than enough for what this build actually needs, and I also think this is more than what was actually shown off in the gravity build as well, but we'll cover a little bit more on that. Now, the last mod that we do want to cover here is going to be our maximized conservation. The reason for this is because the idea is we're going to be spamming this grenade out. Now, you can see that at 45 MP, this is a ridiculous kind of cost for this kind of grenade. So what we're doing is we're trying to cut this down as much as possible. So we've cut it down by over a third. This means that essentially how this works is that every time we've chucked out like about 2-3 of these grenades, we're essentially getting a free one. So that's kind of the idea behind that. We want to cut down as much on the MP side of things as possible, and then that way we've got more MP to start chucking these out, because as soon as we aren't able to chuck out any more traction grenades, then we're going to start opening ourselves up to fire, and obviously our HP is not going to be enough to be able to survive just from that. So that's kind of the overall general of this. We're able to get to 74.3% minus on the skill cooldown. We're able to increase our duration by 85.3%. Absolutely fantastic. And all this is just kind of at the cost of modifiers to our skills, but because Lepic's is so high, it doesn't really make too much of a difference. Now, one question you might be asking me is, why have you not got a Transcendence module in here? Now, there is a very good reason for this, and the reason why is because we do like our passive, which is Close Call. This is a kind of like a get-out-of-jail-free card. This is like our careful side of things, because if we do find ourselves in a position, especially when it comes to bossing, where we're finding things that aren't affected by traction grenades, we've got to like face tank a couple of shots, then the idea is that with this passive, we're able to like tank our way all the way back up to being able to have our MP, to be able to get some HP, some healing, to be able to put ourselves in a position that we can take down that boss. And this is also affected by duration as well as cooldown. So you can see that normally as standard this is 600 seconds, which is obviously 10 minutes, but we're able to get this down to 112 seconds, which is less than 2 minutes. And on top of that, the duration of this at standard is 5 seconds, which makes you immune to all damage that's going to be coming in, but we're able to increase this up to 9.6 seconds, which is absolutely huge. If you're able to face tank an enemy, if you're able to go into an infiltration or something like that, some of the seasonal content where you have to take down a boss, you're able to just basically use the Enduring Legacy and just face tank every single bit of damage that's going to be coming your way just from this passive. Now, if you take off, for example, Battle of Stamina, and one of the things that was recommended was regenerative braking, if I put this on, you can see that that now disappears, and we now just have a completely different passive, which gives us a chance of being able to get MP recovery. So we don't have the survival, we don't have the staying power or anything like that, so we just have a chance of being able to get some MP back. But with this build and with some right management, you do not need that, so that's the reason why that pretty much exists when it comes to the build. So if we just pop that back in, you can see once again we're back up to having probably the best passive that possibly exists in this game right now. So yeah, so that's the reason why we don't go for a Transcendence module, and all these pretty much changed most of these things. The other things is obviously you can go for things that do affect like skills and everything like that, but primarily we're just using the traction grenade anyway, and then we're relying on our guns as well as the rest of the stuff, so we do not need anything else pretty much adding in here, so we might as well put some points into HP. Now, to give you an idea as to how this all kind of comes together with the modules, I thought it'd be an idea just to line up some enemies right here, just so you can see the reach that this kind of has. So the idea with all the radius, the idea with all the things, the best way for me to show this off, rather than just relying on damage numbers, is for me to activate our overclock to be able to get some burning on our skills. And you'll see that we do have all these enemies that are stretched out to here. So if I aim for the middle one, you'll also see that every single enemy that is in this line is getting hit by fire. Now, this gets even crazier, obviously, because the grenade is already a decent skill just to be able to reach out and touch things. Obviously, the duration is also working quite nicely with the burn as well, so even more sustained damage over time. But if, for example, I chuck this grenade over here, just so you can see as to how big the radius, I mean, that's still grabbed an enemy. So you can see how crazy this is. So if I just chuck this back over here, we'll just pull in all those enemies. They're all nice and neat into a tiny little thing. They then land they can't do anything in that animation, and they're ready to go. Now, if you can see as to how I can kind of spam this, so once again, pulled, and then just as so basically the throw time for this skill is them landing down on the floor, which they can't do anything, and this is why I pretty much have 100% uptime, and I could just keep spamming this. There is no issue with doing this whatsoever. You can see as to how little MP this is costing me right there on the bar below, and then with the right rolls onto your gear as well, you pretty much have as much MP as you need. Now obviously as you start killing enemies, you can collect like the little MP balls that they drop as well, which is absolutely fantastic. It just really works nicely as this kind of build. So the other thing that's also really nice for this is the fact that yes, you can rely on your grenade to be able to do damage as well, which is quite nice, but you can just chuck your traction grenade, you can chuck your grenade into them to be able to do some nice damage. We've got a really nice cooldown on our grenade as well, so you can chuck like 2 to 3, maybe even 4 at some points to be able to actually get some of that damage soaked in. But if you find something that's a little bit more stubborn, what you can do is activate your ultimate, and you can just, because we've already gone into skill power as well, you're not going to hit as hard as what they do for like for bossing or everything like that, but you can still do some decent chunk damage, and because of how much MP we have, as well as the amount of duration that we've gone into, you can see how many shots, even with just like tiny investment into everything. We haven't even gone into like a boss killing build in terms of like the main kind of weapon for anything like that. Obviously if you go into the one that stacks up, that increases your fire rate as you fire, everything like that, you can get even more shots out of this, but that's not the route that we're going to go with this build. But you can see as to how easy it is to be able to dish out some damage with this. So yeah, it's kind of nutty as to how this build kind of works, and you can see that we've got our ultimate back already, so you can chuck your traction grenade down, start hitting with all this. Because we've increased radius as well, we can actually increase the radius with the ultimate as well. We can still chuck traction grenades while we're in this mode as well. So yeah, you can do some kind of crazy things with this build. It is kind of nutty, but there's not. Obviously, this is one route that you could go, but let's just talk about some of the other things that exist in this build. So let's shift on over to our reactor. Now in the last video we didn't have a really good reactor for this. Now we do not have the perfect reactor, but we do have a really good solution right here. So if we have a look at this one, we do have a burning mechanics, which is absolutely ideal. This comes with fire, this comes with tech rolls, and it also has the condition to be able to do the King's Guard Lance mounting, which is fantastic. That is going to be the main weapon we're going to use, and I'll explain why in a second. On top of that, you can also go for a Greg's reverse fade, just in case, because Greg's is fantastic with this build as well. You managed to see that in the previous build, but I think this King's Guard Lance pretty much takes the cake when it comes to it now. So yeah, so this is a nice secondary if you cannot get a King's Guard Lance, but Greg's is still absolutely fantastic. But the real reason we want to go into this reactor is, yes, it gives us some nice skill power, which is great for our ultimate, it's great for our grenade throw, but it's more about the ratios that are underneath it. Now, fire skill power boost ratio is okay, it's kind of like a nice secondary effect to have, but the main roles that you're looking for when it comes to a god roll for this build is going to be skill cooldown as well as skill duration up. Now if you can get both of those, absolutely fantastic. That is going to be working really nicely with your ultimate, and it's also going to be especially nice for your traction grenade, giving you even more like freedom to be able to throw those down and to be able to have that 100% uptime. Now if you cannot get those rolls, because obviously that is very specific if you're looking for that kind of reactor, ratios are still quite decent. Being able to, you know, cooldown is going to be more useful than duration up if you have a choice between the two, because cooldown is going to impact more for the traction grenade rather than its duration, because the cooldown is much higher of a number, so therefore if you're reducing that down, you'll actually have a better return for that one. But on top of that, you know, any rolls that go into fire or tech are also kind of nice to be able to go for, so you know, those are nice like secondary effects, just to be able to help you out with the damage when it comes to some of your abilities. Now, components-wise, this gets a little bit more fun. Now, in the previous build, I did mention Slayer, and the reason we did go for that is because we were using our skills to be able to still deal some damage, but we're actually going to go a different route with this one. The idea is that we're going to go into a two-piece in Annihilation, because this is going to give us a skill duration increase, which is fantastic. That is exactly what we're looking for when it comes to our traction grenade. But on top of that, we're also, because we do not need to go for the four-piece effect, which is that firearm attack increases as you lose max HP, HP. The only time this really kind of comes into it is once you go up against like bosses, and obviously you're then trying to trigger off your passive, and you can't die and you have 1 HP, so you know you might as well get the extra increase to your firearm attack. But most of the time you're not going to be taking a single point of damage, so what's the point? You're never going to activate that 4-piece bonus, which means that we can go into some other sets to be able to get the extra kind of pieces that are going on. Now, I've personally combined it with a Tomb Vanguard, and the reason why is because, one, I have the perfect rolls for what I'm looking to be able to get out of with this build, but on top of that, the 2-piece is also going to increase my defense. If you do go for the sensor and the auxiliary power, these also give you defense rolls, which is absolutely perfect to put into this build, so you can actually get a little bit of tankiness from your defense combined with your HP, but it's more about the rolls. And the ones we're looking out for here are going to be rolls into max HP and MP recovery out of combat with your auxiliary power. We're also going to be looking for MP recovery in combat as well as max MP for your sensor, and then when it comes to your memory, a roll into defense and a roll into MP recovery modifier is crucial here. The idea with all 3 of these combined means that you're not going to be reliant on those MP balls dropping inside the field. You're going to be able to get out of combat quite quickly with this build as well. I'll show you exactly how to kind of pull that off. But MP recovery is huge there because it just rapidly fills up your bar, and it also gets affected by the MP recovery modifier to go even faster, so you then have as little downtime as possible. But then the sensor also helps you out when you have MP recovery inside combat, so it then mitigates and offsets all the stuff that you're going to be casting as well. So these rolls are going to be crucial, but if you're looking for different components, if you don't want the defensive side of Tomb Vanguard, then alternatively you can go for the Acrobat set for some skill power and some fire attack, or you can also go for the Veteran set if you want to go for some crit rate on your weapons. Me personally, I do prefer the Tomb Vanguard. I think it's better as an overall kind of thing, just in case you do get shot, and it gives you a little bit more staying power, but you know, feel free to be able to go out of those 3 options for yourself. Now, as for getting out of MP combat, or combat to be able to get refresh your MP, you'll see the easiest way to do this is with your compass in the top left. As you can see, it does not have a red outline. It just purely highlights as to where the enemies are, but when it's in a grey state like this, you're outside of combat. If you fire your weapon and you hit someone, you'll see that it goes up to red. If you chuck any skills and it hits an enemy, you're now inside of combat, and that means that you're now affected by your MP recovery inside of combat. As soon as you go back to this grey outside, it's that kind of thing, you can see as to how quickly your MP just pretty much fills back up. I can't actually get through my MP fast enough, and so the idea is to get into this state as quickly as possible. Now, you'll notice that if I chuck my traction grenade, I only go into combat as soon as they start getting affected. As soon as that drops, I will then have a period of time, and then I'm back to being outside of combat. This is fantastic because that means that we can essentially chuck this grenade, pull some enemies away from ourselves, get them all killed if we possible, but as soon as we drop them, literally like 2 seconds later, we're then back to what we were doing. So if we manage to get all the enemies killed inside that group, and we're far enough away from the rest of the enemies, we can then get outside of combat, fill up our MP, and we're good to go. We can start chucking these grenades everywhere, and we're good. You know, that's the essential way of being able to actually get the most out of this build, and that's the reason why we don't use things like MP collector or anything like that, because we don't actually need it. If you've got those rolls, you're able to do things like this, and you're able to just get away with being able to create some distance, and then you're outside of combat, and then you fill up your MP bar. Now lastly, let's talk about the weaponry that pretty much kind of ties this all together, and there's a reason why the commenter was absolutely fantastic at being able to point me in the right direction. Now previously we did use Greg's Reverse Fate to be able to rely on some AoE damage, but this was a kind of like low roll in terms of like, even when you get this fully maxed out, it's only a 20% chance. It's a great ability, it's a fantastic weapon and everything like that, but only a 20% chance to do that AoE. It's not going to be the way to be able to go. So instead what we actually did go for is the recent buffs that happened to Kingsguard lands. It now allows you to be able to just like absolutely chunk enemies in front of you, and you're able to just kind of like keep these up and maintain them. These are like a better version of Jaber. If you haven't seen this weapon before, then you're kind of living under a rock, but essentially what this means is that as soon as you aim and you place down turrets like this, you keep them topped up by shooting them like that with your beam, and essentially any enemies that come into this radius are now going to get shot. So if we get these all up to full, we then chuck our traction grenade, we're pulling our enemies in, and now you can see the damage numbers that are going to start rocking into those. Now these will stay as long as the enemies stay in this area, as well as also our turrets are kept upright. They do have a duration, so you kind of have to micromanage them a little bit. But essentially, this is what we're actually kind of rocking with. Now, the idea is to get as much crit damage as possible. Let's just chuck them away so we don't have to deal with the damage numbers as much as possible. There we go. And those will start rocking themselves down. And the turrets will slowly disappear. Now, the idea of being able to go into this, it's still going because of the amount of damage ticks that actually happened on those enemies. Yeah, so in terms of like setting these up, I do not have a fully set up Kingsguard lance. You can see that I have no duplicates. You ideally want to go into as many as possible with this because they are absolutely huge. They can increase the duration, they reduce the amount of ammo, and ammo is going to be a huge thing when it comes to this weapon. So if we have a look as to how I currently have it set up, you can get an idea as to how little investment I've kind of put into this just so far. Yeah, Lethal Finish is going to be the main mod to be able to go with. A couple of the content creators have done their work on this one, and this is the best way to increase your critical hit rate. It's absolutely fantastic, and I just highly recommend that you do slot that one straight in and obviously fully maximize it out. You want to go for your firearm attack as much as possible, so rifling and reinforcement and action and reaction as standard, and then as many kind of increases to criticals, so critical hit rate as well as critical hit damage is fantastic here as well. And then obviously the more that we can kind of rock into this as well. I would recommend that if you are looking to be able to maximize out on your Kingsguard lance, there are a couple of the content creators. The Full Measure is one of them, Moxie is another. Just feel free to be able to check out one of their guys because they're going to have a little bit more information than I currently do, and they're going to have this fully rocked out as well. So that's going to help you out a little bit more when it comes to this build, but this is currently a work in progress for myself. Now, if you don't have the Kingsguard lance, or if you don't really want to be able to use it, or in case your reactor is mounted for something else, then the other weapons of offer that I would recommend are going to be Greg's Reverse Fate, as well as Enduring Legacy. This is going to help you out when it comes to elites, when it comes to bosses, more stubborn enemies, and all that kind of thing. Greg's is going to be more AoE focused, Enduring Legacy is going to be more single target focused, but if you want to see as to how I currently have these built out, this is my Greg's Reverse Fate. And then we can have a look as to my Enduring Legacy, which is kind of like my go-to, just in case there are stubborn things that kind of sit in front of me as well. But anyway, I've covered exactly how you're supposed to play this build, how this pretty much works, the mechanics behind it, the weaponry, the components, the reactor, everything you could possibly think of. So I think that pretty much kind of wraps it up on this video. Now, while I love what other Descendants do, I am a huge sucker for Blair this season especially. Nothing really makes life easier than Lepic nullifying every single enemy around him and having a get out of jail free card when things get hairy. Now, while it will take some getting used to with that MP management with the tips that I've mentioned here, and using the Kingsguard lance if you've not used that before, this build is well worth the investment and really just makes every mission a piece of cake when done right. So get out there and suck those enemies with your balls. Yeah, that's going to stay in there. So this is the section that I want to hear from you. How are you finding the first Descendant when it comes to its first season? What are your thoughts on Lepic as a mobber Descendant? And how hyped are you ready for Ultimate Freyna in a couple of weeks? Let me know all that and more down below. Massive thank you for making your way to the end of the video. And as I always say, keep yourself safe, keep yourselves well. See you all on the next video.